It's kind of the unofficial, official start to summer. And this is the time of year when, much like the holidays, we're back in that cycle where maybe you're reflecting on where you're at in your own fitness and wellness journey. You're starting to throw on your bathing suit and you might not feel your absolute best. And first and foremost, I want to say that is okay, because this shit is hard.
Let's link up with Krysta on the FYX. She's a wellness coach with a focus on mental well-being and physical strength.
Hey there, FYX listeners. Welcome to your latest episode of the FYX podcast. I'm your host, Krysta Huber, and I'm back fresh off a little vacation. For those of you who follow me on social media, I have been bombarding you over the last couple of days with lots of fun beach and wedding content from one of my closest friends who I'm so lucky to be able to meet and spend some really important and transformative time of my life in college when we studied abroad. She got married in the Dominican Republic, and it was just so incredible to be able to be in a room with so many people who love her, her husband, and just feel the love that they have between the two of them. So recording this episode after a long weekend of a lot of fun, but a week prior to that of some time to just rest, relax, recover, put my phone in airplane mode, had very limited Wi-Fi with traveling outside of the country. And it was honestly one of the best things I could have done for myself in a long time. And if you've seen some of the other content I've been producing in the last few days, it's really started to get me to reflect on how I define and how we in the fitness and wellness industry define what is included. Like, what are the different components that really represent true wellness and true health, and how we can pull on all of those different things to be able to show up and live our best life. For as cliche as that may be, I think it's something that gets overlooked and we're too quick to call it a cliche, whereas we should all be motivated to do the things that we want to do that are ultimately going to make us our happiest. That doesn't mean that every single thing we do on a daily basis we're going to find joy in, and I'm a realist, so I'd be totally lying if I said that that's how I wake up and operate my every single day. But when you get those opportunities to be able to slow down and reflect, sit by the pool, sit on the beach, crush a couple books, and feel like you can just push everything aside for a little bit, it puts a lot into perspective. So I hope to bring that fresh angle to this episode today. But what I also wanted to talk about too is the fact that it's kind of the unofficial, official start to summer. And this is the time of year when, much like the holidays, we're back in that cycle where maybe you're reflecting on where you're at in your own fitness and wellness journey. You're starting to throw on your bathing suit and you might not feel your absolute best. And first and foremost, I want to say that is okay, because this shit is hard. And it is. There's so many people out there who try to make any kind of calorie deficit or some different, cool, new, sexy approach to dieting seem easy. And it's just not. But there are things you can do to make what is challenging a little bit easier. And in my biased opinion, one of those things is hiring a coach. I myself have a coach. I've got multiple coaches, and I think it's so important to always be talking about that whenever we have an opportunity to do so, because we look at social media and we look at these small bits and pieces of stories that people choose to share with us, and it doesn't always paint that accurate of a picture. And for me personally, a lot of what I've been working towards in my own fitness and wellness journey over the past 3 to 4 months or so, I've been in a calorie deficit. I've done that with the support of both a nutrition coach and a personal trainer to keep me accountable. And a lot of it was leading up to this trip. Now, I had two options in going into this trip and looking at how I wanted to then continue to practice those good habits while I was away. So hopefully in hearing this conversation today, it might give you a couple ideas that you can walk away from this and thinking about, one, how you want to reframe your goals as you head into a time of year where we're going to the beach, we might be day drinking a little bit, you're going to barbecues, maybe there's different foods around that aren't always going to be the absolute best option in getting us to where we want to go. And how the heck do you navigate all of that? It's also a really good time to ask yourself, would I like to work with a coach? I think we can be really quick to say, oh, the summer's here. I didn't get to exactly where I wanted to go, so I'm just going to put this off until September. But I would like to challenge you as you continue to listen to this podcast episode to reframe that mindset and instead say to yourself, this just may be the perfect time for me to work with somebody. And here's why. This is your life. You are committed to this. Every year you're going to go through the same cycle where these same potential obstacles are going to show up. So instead of just kicking the can down the road and instead of just deciding, oh, I'll worry about it in a couple of months, oh, I'll worry about it next year, why not do something about it today? So all that said, if you are in the market to potentially consider working with a coach, I do have a few spots open on my coaching roster for the summer, and I would be honored to speak with you. So if you're listening to this episode and you feel like any of what I just said resonated, be sure to shoot me a DM. You can reach me at the Krysta Huber on Instagram, and I can send you the link to apply for coaching and have a complimentary first session with me, and we can talk about what your goals are. And that's actually a big part of what cycling through these seasons of coaching is. There's a huge, I think we put a little bit of a misconception because I think we put so much focus on, oh, well, if I work with a coach, they're going to help me with a meal plan or looking at my macros or encouraging me to work out a certain way, tracking my steps. And yes, all of those things may come up in conversation. But a theme that I've been sensing and catching up with my clients over the last 2 days and hearing what they've been doing over the last few weeks or so is they're starting to reassess their goals. And I had an awesome client ask me this afternoon on a call, do you think it's important for me to write down some of my goals? And I love the way she asked it because I think it's really easy for us to just get in a mindset of when we first start working on something, we don't take the time to necessarily stop, sit down for a second, write some things down on paper, and then revisit those things and see, one, am I meeting that? Am I on track to whatever that is? Or in this case, and I think the case of a lot of people, have my priorities shifted a little bit? Have some events happened in my life that maybe the goals I set for myself when I first started aren't really that important or as relevant for me? And I think the best way I can walk through that is, from talking about my own personal experience and just talking about what I've been up to with my own nutrition and fitness in the last few months. And again, how I chose to show up for myself when I was on this vacation at a time that typically for most people is a time when they just might be like, oh, screw it. I've got this week, I've got these 4 days, I've got this weekend to just enjoy myself, and I'll jump right back to it when I get home. And truth be told, I've totally been there. I've totally had that relationship with food. I've totally had that relationship with my fitness. And it's taken a solid 2+ years to actively work at changing that. So anything I'm sharing isn't something that you can just snap your fingers and achieve overnight. But it takes the effort, it takes the practice, it takes the work. And why not embrace all of these opportunities? But again, put a different lens on it and be able to say to yourself, well, instead of making a choice and then reflecting on it the next day and being like, ugh, why did I do that? Why not use it as the opportunity to be like, well, how can I show up in this way differently? What can I do that's going to get me a little bit closer to those goals? So for me personally, back in February or so, I was having a conversation with my own nutrition coach about setting a timeline for my own calorie deficit. Reason being is we never want to be in a calorie deficit for more than maybe 12, 16 weeks is usually a solid sweet spot. And we want to make sure that we're putting ourselves in a position where we are setting ourselves up for that fat loss to be successful. So leading up to all of this, she and I had spent a solid 12 months focusing on working hard in the gym, intentionally eating more food, and then therefore creating a situation where maybe that diet, and when I say diet, I mean calorie deficit, would be a little bit easier in air quotes, to achieve because I spent some time communicating to my body, showing my body that on a consistent basis, I was going to eat X amount of food. And it doesn't really matter what those calories are because everybody's different. And I hate to be like, oh, everyone, any coach that tells you shouldn't eat 1,200 calories doesn't know what they're talking about. It's not that simple. It depends so much on your height, your weight, your dieting history. There's too many factors that go into it there. But what we really looked at was what could I build a consistent plan around and then execute it on a daily basis. So we did that, put in the work, got very uncomfortable. And I'm very happy to say that even though that time I did not fully trust the process every single day, it was one of the best things I could have ever done for myself because selfishly, and I'm surprised to be saying this, but this calorie deficit was one of the easiest. It really, I started seeing my weight responding in such a quicker way. And I share this to say that if you can be patient for some period of time and trust a process that may sound very counterintuitive to what other people typically say, to what your friend might be telling you she's doing for a diet, you could be really surprised at the results that you achieve. And ultimately, the way I define that success is I sent her a text towards the end of my trip, put on a bikini, and I've honestly felt the best that I've felt in a good 2 years. And that for me was more important than a certain number on the scale. It was more important than a certain body fat percentage. But at the same time, I've seen improvements in all of those areas. So I'm not going to discredit that piece of it. But I think it is important to note that when we think about all of this, we want to think about it from the side of, one, it's okay to want to change your physique. It's okay to want to look different. And if that's something that's going to make you confident, good. It should. You should want to wake up and look in the mirror and be like, I feel great. But at the same time, that is going to mean that you're going to have some days where you really don't. It's also going to mean that you're going to have to challenge your perspective when it comes to the way thinking that what worked for you before is going to work for you this time around. Because in my own personal life, I saw that was not going to be an option because so many other things change. Now, a little bit of a tangent, but what I really want to bring it back to was, well, what did I do for myself? Setting the stage of having spent a full year refocusing on being consistent with food tracking, on making sure I was getting enough protein, moving my body in a different way, focusing way less on cardio and a lot more on periodization and specific strength training to really change my body composition. What did I then do once it was time for us to start the calorie deficit? When I look at it and I really break it down, all I did was take a lot of the same foods that I was already eating and cut their portion sizes. In some cases, I needed to add more. For example, when you go through a calorie deficit, you're changing the amount of carbohydrates that you're eating. Let's say some of the foods that you had a little more flexibility in fitting in before, some of more of those dense carbohydrates, as I like to refer to them as, things like potatoes or rice or even bread. Maybe I replace some of those or reduce the portion size and replace it with a lot more veggies, making sure I was getting enough fiber. And then, of course, increasing my protein intake to help me retain my muscle that I worked so hard over the course of the last year to incorporate into my physique, because that was what is ultimately going to make me look toner and get me to that desired physique that I want. It's not just about being in that calorie deficit and the number on the scale going down further and further and further. The other thing that I did that was really a shift for me was maintained more of a focus on resistance training, slowing down my workouts, not being that person that was doing crazy amounts of cardio. And then when I did pick it back up, it was still more of what we like to refer to as like that lower intensity activity, going for walks, focusing on increasing my steps. Yes, I definitely threw in a few more of your typical high intensity workouts, but it's not to the degree that I was doing 6 days a week 2 years ago. And I personally think that my body responded really well to that. But in addition to that, I also just looked at where I could make specific sacrifices and compromises. And this part's important. This part is important because this is where the hard stuff comes back in. Because there were definitely times where it was, over the course of the past couple of months, I've celebrated my own birthday. I've celebrated family members' birthdays. I've gone out with my friends. And truthfully, there were things that I needed to say no to. So I want to be super clear. This is not hey, you can still eat whatever you want to eat, because that's just not true. And I would love to say that that's actually true. But when it comes to having a certain goal that you want to achieve, we need to talk about the fact that you have to decide what is more important to you. And when I'm talking to my clients and using myself as an example, one thing that I personally always come back to is alcohol. I happen to be somebody who really loves dessert, and I would prefer to have the cookie, the ice cream, the cake over, say, a glass of wine. And so there were definitely instances where I chose those things instead, or there were other times where I turned down both because I would plan my day. I was structured around my food tracking and making sure I was consistently hitting the numbers that had been set for me. And sometimes I would make adjustments, and other times I'd have to ask myself, is this going to make you happy both right now, but also in the long run? Because ultimately I knew that I was going to be motivated by trying on a certain dress for this wedding and it looking the way that I envisioned it to look. And for me, that was more worth it than in the moment wanting that drink or whatever that food was that might not necessarily fit within my specific macro goals for that day, that week, that month, etc. The other piece of this, which is always an area that I struggle with and continue to need to prioritize, is recovery, specifically in the form of sleep. I've had to really get honest with myself about tracking my sleep better and knowing that I need to get into bed earlier. And it's the unsexy stuff like sleep that is just so essential and really a game changer when it comes to fat loss. If you're not giving your body that time to slow down, to rest and recharge, there's only so much you can do in the gym and with your nutrition to help you get you to where you want to go. But I'm definitely not going to sit here and pretend to be an expert on that topic, because in full transparency, it's always an area that's something that I need to work on. But I did really try to focus on getting off my phone earlier, putting it in sleep mode, trying to unplug and unwind. And then ultimately, when I went on this trip, it was forced on me because my Wi-Fi only connected at certain times. I had my phone in airplane mode. And it was honestly, in thinking about it now, one of the best things I could have done, not just for my sleep, but also for my mental health too. I was able to just really reset and spend time without being distracted and just enjoying the present moment and exactly where I am. And that's actually a really good segue into what I then did on my vacation, because I think one of the biggest mistakes I tend to see from people is they set a goal, they set the timeline for it, and then by the time they get to that point, that's when they're all out in the opposite direction. And I would argue that that's actually a sign that maybe you weren't really present enough for what process you were going through in that calorie deficit or whatever it was that you were doing to try to get to where you wanted to go, because you saw it as this finite timeline rather than understanding that a lot of this is seasons that you're going to go through, and we need to have some kind of exit strategy. So what I did while I was away is I tried to, again, focus on some of those compromises or sacrifices. Going to a hotel, a lot of resorts, oftentimes you might have a buffet or something like that for breakfast. And for a lot of people, that can be a really tricky situation to navigate, because there are foods that you don't necessarily have around at home all the time that may be more tempting for you to eat in that situation. And what I always like to ask people when we talk about this, and something that is kind of my mantra, is this food some kind of unique cuisine that if I eat it here, it's going to be the absolute best version of that food possible, and I'll regret not having done that. In those instances, I will make the decision to plan the rest of my day around that particular meal. Or is it just one of those things where I'm okay with making my breakfast seemingly a little bit more boring. That's all subjective, but because it will give me the flexibility later to eat what I want to eat. So breaking that down a little more, here's an example. The first half of my trip, I was staying in a beach resort, and they did have a buffet for both breakfast and lunch. And I, at first, wasn't sure if I was going to have a lot of the options that I knew were going to work for me, which at breakfast is usually some combination of eggs and egg whites. Now, it worked out great, and this is in a lot of instances an option that you have available to you, that there's usually some kind of omelet station. So at breakfast, I knew that that would have been one of the easiest meals for me to be able to get my protein. And because I knew it was one of the easiest meals for me to be able to get my protein, it was a no-brainer. Set yourself up for success. Start your day off right and say, you know what? Okay, maybe there are other things there that I would like to have, like pancakes or waffles or whatever it is. But you have to ask yourself, is there something else that I might be eating later today that a combination of all of those things together isn't necessarily going to work? And that's exactly how I navigated it. In addition to that, I then focused on foods that I knew that I could eat in higher volumes, like berries and other sorts of fruit, or foods that I knew were going to be the freshest there. For example, in the Dominican, I had like the best mango, and that was something that I wanted to eat every single morning, and I really looked forward to it, again, because it's local to that place. You know it's going to be delicious and also healthy for you too. Then navigate through lunch and dinner, and that's where really I would just put myself in a position where I said, okay, am I getting more protein at these meals? Yes. Am I probably going over my calorie goal? 100%, because I was then having pasta dishes, things that were heavy with different creams, lots of steak, and all of those things are just denser foods. It doesn't make them bad. It's just all relative to whatever else you might have been eating in that day. Now, a lot of times I have people ask me, do you track your food on vacation? And this can be a little bit of a tricky conversation. There's a lot of people with a lot of different opinions about it, but I think it still comes back to my original point around the fact that it just depends on what your goals are. Nobody is right or wrong, but that's where a coach can come in to just kind of have that open dialogue with you to say, hey, if your goal is X, then I recommend that you potentially track your food. Or if your goal is Y, then maybe it's not something we need to do. So personally, I'm in a place where I kind of loosely decided to track, because when I look through to the rest of the summer and some of the other goals that I have, I'm making my way there, but I'm not 100% at the place where I want to be, that I'm ready to just totally take a break. And I am the only person who can ultimately make that decision for myself with that support and help of my own nutrition coach. So that's another one. And then the last big one that I think everyone always wants to know, and I actually intentionally really tried to show a lot of this on my social media, is what do you do when it comes to vacation and alcohol? Because that is usually the thing, if you've ever spent any time really paying attention to your alcohol intake, that is the difference maker between someone who achieves their fitness goals a little bit faster, achieves their body composition that they would like to have, than maybe someone who is saying, hey, I don't want to necessarily give up alcohol. There were times when leading up to this trip, I was like, I don't really need that glass of wine. Or I was going out with my friends, choosing to have water. I, as you guys know, am a huge fan of a Spindrift. I've got one of them sitting on my desk right now as I'm recording this episode. And that's fine with me. Like, that's a choice that I'm willing to personally make. And again, not something that everyone has to be on the same page about. But then when it came to the trip, I did not track my alcohol intake, but I'll be the first to say that I drank plenty of alcohol, definitely more than I usually do. But where I'm able to assess whether or not I've made progress is in my relationship with that. How did I feel about it the next day? And how did I feel about it when I got home and stepped on the scale? And I felt totally neutral to it. And I feel like for me personally, with where I've been and having operated on these different extremes of being all in or all out, that was a huge sign of progress for me. I also just wanted to be able to be present and enjoy the moment. And sometimes that might look like a glass of wine for you, or sometimes that just might look like, you know, having a different kind of food that you don't always normally eat. And all of those options are great. and really being able to get to a mental headspace where you can be good with whatever you choose, but then also be realistic and recognize, hey, when you step on the scale, when you get back, you have absolutely no reason to be like, oh, I don't like what I see, because you can explain it. And because you can be honest with yourself when you look in the mirror and you say, hey, that actually is the reality here, it's going to make it that much easier for you to ultimately have the relationship with food, have the relationship with socializing, have the relationship with the gym, have the relationship with food tracking, whatever it is, be that much healthier and that much more sustainable and truly rooted in exactly where you are today. And I think a lot of times that's an area where a lot of people can get stuck because we're so quick to play a little game with ourselves. I was talking to a client about this today. A lot of times when we track our food and we're estimating because it's something that we've eaten out, we have a bias to pick the option that's most similar to what we think we ate, that's usually the lowest in calories, when in reality, that probably wasn't exactly what you ate. But you have to remember, in those situations, the only person you are doing a disservice to is you. That's it. That's it. So hopefully a few of those tips were helpful. Hopefully it kind of gives you some perspective on how to think about these types of situations, whether it's holidays, whether it's traveling or whatever. But the last piece I wanted to really leave you with is the realization that at the end of the day, there's so much more to all of those experiences than what you're eating. And for me, having been able to spend quality time with friends that, as I mentioned, studied abroad with, we lived in China, and it was frankly quite a culture shock. It was a huge transition, and we went through some pretty challenging stuff together. So we have a bond that is very special. And it's one of those types of friendships, or two of those types of friendships, where you can not talk for months and you pick up exactly where you left off. You have so many amazing memories together. And for me, just I spent the whole weekend laughing and having the absolute best time. And it's allowed me to now, a few days later, recognize, and I think I knew this, but I haven't necessarily taken the time to acknowledge it, that is such a big component of your fitness, of your nutrition, because it affects your mood and it affects the way you show up and it affects your outlook and your perspective. And a lot of those components are what really drive you to make certain decisions around food, especially if you are somebody who may have had a history of being more of an emotional eater. And I've definitely fallen into that category. There are so many times that previously I would spend so much time thinking about what food choices I was making, feeling like I had to be so conscious of that. But in just being able to, again, unplug, have my phone in airplane mode, not always have access to Wi-Fi, I was able to really recognize the power in being so much more present, in that you spend so much less time thinking about the food choices or thinking about the alcohol that you're drinking, that you're just having fun. And that fills your cup so much. And I think that's something that is overlooked, and something that I can only hope I can serve as a reminder to you, the listener, and to any client that I work with, that we have to look at this from a bigger picture. We have to be able to zoom out and appreciate the fact that that balance, that word that everybody is just constantly chasing and saying, well, that's what I want to achieve. The only way we can do that is by really asking ourselves, what is most important to me? And it's okay for those things to change. So, little food for thought for you on this lovely Thursday. Happy June. Can't believe we're into another month yet again. Time keeps flying by. And if any of this message resonated with you, as always, would so appreciate if you would share it, send it to a friend, post it on your Instagram stories, send me some feedback. Let me know what you want to hear more about as we get into the summer months. I'm happy to answer specific questions, provide specific examples around how to navigate some of these more commonly challenging situations that usually prevent people from getting to exactly where it is that they want to go. Send me a DM. You guys know I'm always there, and I will see you on our next episode.